Okay, I'm going to start by just saying we have a couple more programs coming up. You will see over there that we have, our members have received it in your email, but I have some printouts for people who aren't members. We have 2 more talks coming up, one on October 14th in the Green Room at the Veterans Memorial Building down next to the Opera House. We will have Paul Curran, who is an internationally renowned director, and he is the director of the Tristan and Isolde, which will be staged in San Francisco. It'll be a really nice talk. It's free. We're trying to get more people interested in Wagner on the level where we are here today, and it's not scary. We're all nice. We all play nice, but it's a great way to meet other opera lovers, and it's a great way to get to know more about Wagner's work and become enthusiasts like some of us who have been in this society for many, many years, more than 20 for me. Okay, so on the 16th we have, this is the programs coming up next year, 2025, already scheduled. In January 16th, and this will go up on our website, so don't even worry about writing it down, just listen and you'll hear who's going to be there. On January 16th, we'll have a live meeting here with Leo Ehler, professor and conductor of the California Youth Symphony, and he gave a talk earlier this year that just blew everybody out of their socks and boots. I mean, he was wonderful. He's going to talk about everything you always wanted to know about thematic transformation, aka leitmotifs, but we're afraid to ask. This session will include handouts of ring motifs and explanations, and a CD to go with it. And he'll make copies of the CDs and the texts, and it will be very easy even for non-musicians to understand. And he emphasizes it, guaranteed. And he's a wonderful speaker. He's very funny and easy on the on this. He's not really hardcore Wagner. We have 2 February programs in development. We're not sure which one is going to make it up on the boards, as they say. Both of them would be live. The first one is a visit to the San Francisco Opera Archives. And I'm trying to get a sign of life from the scheduling department for the education studio at the Veterans Memorial Building. They must be on coffee break this week. And then if that doesn't work out for whatever reason, because the ballet and the opera get first right of refusal on that space, and so you get behind them, and if they can bump you off. So we'll figure out, we'll either have it here or there. Or a video presentation by a local student and PhD candidate called Soft Valkyrie, and it's a video which has the leitmotifs in it, part of Valkyrie, not the whole thing, and wonderful videos, wonderful music, and it's narrated by Stephen Fry. Some of you may know who Stephen Fry is. So he adds just this wonderful dramatic emphasis to this. I've seen this, and I really enjoyed it quite a lot. March 1st, via Zoom, Tristan und Isolde, the medieval origin story of Tristan and Isolde. The talk will be accompanied by medieval minstrels and Mary Springfells on the gamba, and also lutes and so on. Backdrop will be illuminated manuscripts from the legends of Tristan und Isolde. It's all brought together into a video presentation by Desiree May. That will be on March 1st via Zoom. And then on April 6th in 2025, Professor Jeffrey Buller, who's been a collaborator with us for many, many years, this will be via Zoom. I have no idea what he's going to speak on, but it's going to be a good talk. He's a very wonderful, dynamic speaker, and I even think he's a trainer for professional speaking. Who knew? So anyway, that's what's coming up. Again, don't forget October, the 2 October programs. They're over there. Members, you all got it in your email. And so with that, I will set about to what's our presentation today. So, our greatly beloved Professor Simon Williams is an emeritus professor of the Department of Theater and Dance at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and an active director both in opera and spoken drama. Williams is internationally recognized as an authority on the history and acting and Shakespearean performance, on opera and drama and the history of operatic stages. He has also lectured worldwide on Wagner and served for several years as the English-speaking lecturer at the Bayreuth Festival. He's spoken on a wide range of operas at both opera houses and opera guilds worldwide. He's the principal speaker at the annual exciting Opera at Oakhurst weekend in the California Sierras. Are you doing it again, or you're done? Not this year, okay? He has authored 4 books on German theater, 2 of them on Wagner, as well as serving as co-editor of the first English language history of German theater, and he is the chief editor of the Cambridge Encyclopedia of Stage Actors and Acting. So please welcome Simon Williams. And remember, if you have to get up and use these facilities, back in the room and out, if you would please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Am I on?
No.
Oh, okay.
We can hear.
Yes, good. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and let me say what a pleasure it is to be here yet again. I love coming and talking in San Francisco. Actually, I'm particularly pleased to be talking today about Tristan and Isolde. The reason is that several months ago I was live, and this actually was a fairly long distance between the completion of the opera and the first performance. And it wasn't because people didn't like it. Well, I'll talk about that a little bit more. Anyway, eventually it was performed in Munich solely because King Ludwig II was patronized it and funded the performance. When it was first performed, the audience and the critical reception was very mixed. Barry Millington, who I find is sort of still perhaps the most sort of reliable critic of this, actually says that in fact the negative criticism and the negative reception was stronger than the positive. There were certainly very strong positive welcomings of Tristan and Isolde, but far from everybody liked it. For many, it was a difficult work. It was tonally uncertain. It had an apparent lack of action, and it was immoral. Go into that in a moment. The next production of Tristan and Isolde actually didn't happen until 1874. Die Meistersinger was first performed in 1868, and by 1874 it had received 11 separate productions throughout the German-speaking countries. Tristan and Isolde, which actually had been completed way before Die Meistersinger, actually only had its second production in Weimar in 1874. And from these productions, particularly from the first production, it acquired an uncanny reputation. It was considered to be an opera that sent singers mad and even killed them. And I'm not actually being flippant here. It was very widely regarded as a killer. The Vienna Court Opera actually was one of those opera houses that wanted to do Tristan. It put on 77 rehearsals and eventually gave up because they couldn't play the music, and they didn't, and the singers had so many problems. It is said that the tenor who was singing Tristan was actually sent mad. I don't know how true that is, but certainly you'll find it's there in a number of the biographies. The first singer of Tristan, and this one is not in fact sort of an urban legend or anything, the first singer of Tristan in Munich was Ludwig Schnorr von Karlsfeld, whose dates us 1836 to 1865. In fact, he died 6 weeks after he gave the first series of performances as Tristan. He in fact caught a cold while he was lying in a draft on the stage in the third act and died directly as a result. So the opera had this rather uncanny reputation of being not very good for you. Anyway, in addition to this, it was seen by many people as being an immoral opera. And the charge of immorality was first raised in the first reviews of the Munich performance, and then it stayed with Tristan and Isolde for a long time. I had great fun reading all the various negative and positive reviews of Tristan and Isolde, but it just two sort of came out, two of the negative ones that you might be familiar, one if not you probably will enjoy them now, but one of the first sort of most notorious comments came from Clara Schumann, who was writing after seeing the Weimar performance in 1874, and she wrote, "It's the most disgusting thing I have ever seen or heard in my life. To be forced to see and hear such crazy lovemaking the whole evening, in which every feeling of decency is violated, and by which not only the public but even musicians seem to be enchanted, that is the saddest thing I have ever experienced in my artistic life. During the second act, the two of them sleep and sing. Through the whole last act, for fully 40 minutes, Tristan dies, and they call that dramatic." And she put the 3 exclamation marks. And then the second quotation comes from somebody who's really very surprising, a gentleman by the name of Bjørnsen, who actually was regarded by Henrik Ibsen as being somebody who would be his heir in great playwriting. He wasn't a good playwright, but he was a very notable man. And he wrote, "The most enormous depravity I've ever seen or heard, but in its own crazy way it is so overwhelming that one is deadened by it as by a drug. Even more immoral than the plot is this seasick music that destroys all sense of structure in its quest for tonal colour. In the end, one just becomes a glob of slime on ocean shore, something ejaculated by that masturbating pig in an open furnace." I'm going to leave that up to you to interpret. I can't imagine someone like Ibsen, who did think at one point that Bjørnsen was his heir, would actually have said anything quite like that. But there are myriad more judgments that could be quoted. These are two of the more entertaining ones. To be fair, there were many enthusiastic endorsements, and there were members of the audience and commentators who went to the first performance in Munich in 1865, and they regarded Tristan and Isolde as a key event not only in their opera-going career, but in their whole lives. In other words, there were people from the very beginning who found this to be a quite remarkable work, but there was an astonishing division, really, in the audience and the public view of the opera. But for many audiences in 19th century Germany, and then, by the way, in 19th century Europe as a whole, because this was what was called the Victorian age. Not, Victoria only ruled in Great Britain, but actually what we call a Victorian society was characteristic of most of bourgeois Europe, the people who really, in fact, went to the opera and patronized it. For many audiences in the 19th century, Tristan and Isolde was an immoral opera. It was his most subversive music drama. Even in Paris, which always sort of fancies itself on being the rather sort of liberal and free sort of city, even in Paris, fathers were warned not to take their daughters to performances of Tristan and Isolde. Now, my talk is going to begin by exploring a little bit more why audiences were scandalized by Tristan and Isolde, and how Wagner actually confronted them with a radical vision of sexuality that confounded them and infuriated them. And even worse, he presented to them in a dramatic structure that shockingly reversed people's understanding of what an opera should be. In other words, operas should end in a certain way. There are certain sort of moral messages that should be delivered. And Tristan and Isolde did not do this, even though at some point perhaps people thought it was going to. Oh, we'll get to that as I go on. But you know, despite this in Tristan and Isolde, Wagner produced an epochal work that fused two major dramatic forms that were widely considered and historically considered to be absolutely irreconcilable. It brought them together in a way that I think nobody else had done before. And in so doing, it introduced a new concept of dramatic action that had a tremendous influence. One still actually can feel this influence in our theatre today. Now, first, moralism in the 19th century. Let's get back to that issue of morality before we move on to something else. The 19th century popular theatre, both spoken and sung, was intensely moralistic. It was conflicted above all when it came to matters of love and of sex. And it would normally sort of say that love and lust are two irreconcilable impulses in human beings. Well, you know Wagner wouldn't agree with that. Probably most of us wouldn't either. But anyway, the Romantic Age, which we can say sort of roughly spread from 1770 through to 1870, the Romantic Age had elevated romantic love as the most desirable of all conditions. Romantic love involves the total adoration of the person who one loves. It involves the obliteration of the self, the absorption of yourself in your partner's self, and vice versa. It creates the illusion of total oneness with each other. It's intensely erotic, and it's highly idealistic, and it is transformative. Romantic love fills one with the most joyful sense of life, but it also brings us closer than almost any other experience we encounter in our lives to an awareness of death. Love and death in some ways seem to have there's a jointure between them, there's a relationship between them. It moves us toward the extreme borders of our being, both extreme borders, complete love of life and a complete sense of death. It can fling one from the peaks of happiness to the slough of utter desperation and back again. Actually, romantic love on its own is probably not too great a basis upon which to build marriage. Some people might disagree with that, but certainly the way I've described it is it's a very sort of vulnerable and a very volatile phenomenon. The real problem in the 19th century, though, was the romantic love really conflicted with the marital practices of the more privileged and wealthier classes in Europe. And I'm thinking here of the haute bourgeoisie, the upper middle class, and the aristocracy of Europe. Those classes that actually were the big classes to patronize the theatre, particularly the opera. These families, particularly well, actually both classes, in both the haute bourgeoisie and in the aristocracy, children should marry basically for the benefit of their family, for money, to stabilize the social condition, their social position, I beg your pardon, and sometimes for political reasons as well. Sexual and emotional compatibility was not considered to be particularly important in this particular sort of view of marriage. And of course, human nature goes against these sort of restrictions. Just think how many if you read 18th and 19th century novels from Europe, and indeed from the United States as we move into the sort of the latter part of the 18th century and on, think of how many of these novels center on the conflicts between daughters and fathers. The daughter wants to marry someone whom she's in love with, and of course the father wants her to marry the wealthiest, the most suitable suitor. So the conflict between daughters and fathers as to whom the daughter will marry is actually not an unfamiliar theme even today. We can still see it in a fair amount of literature. It's not quite as de rigueur as it was in the 19th century. But this is a pattern common. There's also a pattern, I beg your pardon, there's also a common pattern throughout the 19th century, in particularly in theatre and also in literature, of women who enter into a marriage, women who are normally very sort of sexually very attractive, and then they are discovered after they have married to have a past. This past will normally include perhaps scandalous relationships with other men. It might even include a divorce. This discovery of this past leads to a breakup of the marriage and a breakup of the family. Or we find that socially sanctioned marriage is destroyed by women from a husband's past. He's very happily married, but then suddenly sort of somebody whom he had an affair with way in the past comes back to haunt him. And this actually was the foundation of a tremendous amount of melodrama. The fallen woman, never darken my doorstep again. We're familiar with the sort of rather cliched view of this drama that comes through. Variations on the theme that I just mentioned, the theme of the fallen woman, abounded. Usually these plays and operas would end with the woman being ostracized, expelled from the family, and then punished with death. She could die from poverty, she could die from suicide, die from illness, from murder, or, in the words of the great melodramatist of English melodrama, Michael Booth, he says, she can just die from sin. That's all we can do. And actually sometimes they don't even, it's not even sin, she just dies at the end because she's expected to die. Her death basically is society's revenge for breaking social codes. More deeply, I think it actually also betrays might betray man's terror of female sexuality. But that gets us into issues of depth fighter psychology that only came to be explored actually early in the 20th century. Now, 19th century opera is absolutely packed with women of dubious virtue. I'm just going to list 9 operas here, and these are just the 9 most popular operas. First, Lucia de Lammermoor, 1837. If anybody, by the way, wants to see Lucia de Lammermoor as a melodrama, as a woman with a past, get the DVD of the recent Covent Garden production, which is absolutely fabulous. Though it's horrifying at the same time. But it does deal with this issue. La Traviata, 1853. Di Valkyria, Tristan and Isolde. We'll get to that in a moment. Carmen, 1875. Parsifal, 1882. Manon, 1884. La Bohème, 1895. And Salome, 1905. And I have just scratched the surface of this. This is a theme that actually appears in many, many different things. One might even argue that in Umbello and Mascara, we see that theme there to a certain extent. Ultimately, Gustav is killed because he seduced a wife. There was a change. Actually, the husband is going to shoot the wife and then decides not to. So that is a change. But in fact, we can still see the same pattern of thinking at work. It was a pattern that actually Verdi, in fact, then began to sort of move against. But anyway, Wagner is writing right in the middle of this set of operas about the problem of sexuality and marriage. But Wagner did not embrace conventional morality. He used the fallen woman for a different purpose. Let's have a look very quickly at his maybe fallen woman. There's one woman in one of his early operas who literally falls, and this is Sept in Der Fliegende Holländer. She literally falls, she throws herself off the cliff, but she saves the Dutchman. It is not because she's being punished, it is because she is sacrificing herself for somebody else. We may have many problems with that, but we have to recognize that this is in fact a different motive. In Tannhäuser, quite obviously this lady is completely fallen. You just want to see her twice. She doesn't really develop as a character, she's more there as sort of a symbol. But we have Elizabeth in Tannhäuser, who actually I find is a rather interesting character, because early on she shows some promise of becoming a fallen woman, but never falls. But anyway, she eventually redeems, she dies, but in dying she redeems Tannhäuser with her prayers and her death. So in a way, her death serves in some ways the same function as the death of Sept did. In Lohengrin, we have what is, I think, probably the most conventional death of a woman in Wagner. As a punishment for betraying Lohengrin's trust, Elsa dies. Does she? I don't know. Actually, I don't know anybody who can answer why Elsa dies at the end of Lohengrin. I often wonder, well, and in a way, this is perhaps the most sort of the most acceptable. It's just an admission that the two of them cannot live together. These are two totally incompatible people. But one of the things when you come out of Lohengrin is people sort of say, well, why did she die? There's material there for a good 5-hour conversation. But anyway, that is the most different one. Then we do have the sort of the genuine, real fallen women in Wagner. Sieglinde in Die Walküre. She reverses entirely the morality of marriage. She has that fabulous scene in Act 2, which if I had time I'll play you an extract from, in which she sings to Siegmund after they have made love is, I am polluted, I must die, I must go. Not because she has made love with her brother and committed incest and violated marriage, but because she has been polluted by marriage, by her joining with Hunding. And by the way, Clara Schumann, I mean, the extract I read to you, she actually does say, she's just carrying on the way that Sieglinde did, that nasty Sieglinde. So Sieglinde, quite clearly, she is, it's a reversal of the bourgeois view of marriage. There's one of Wagner's heroines who doesn't. I don't think I need make many comments about this Ava and Die Meistersinger, but this is a comedy. She survives, and we hope, certainly I hope, she flourishes for a good 80 or 90 years still. And then we have Kundry, the most puzzling of all. Actually, yes, it is the most puzzling of all, even more so perhaps than Elsa. She dies out of exhaustion, out of sin, or does she die from just being a woman?
Yeah.
Sometimes I've seen productions where you do feel that. You're just dying because there's a whole bunch of men here, and you don't belong to this world. It's difficult to tell. Wagner was a good enough dramatist to really leave these questions open. But certainly the best, the happiest, the most satisfying Parsifal I've ever seen was put just down the road here at the Opera House about 25 years ago, the Nicholas Lane-Hoff production, when she lived, and she walked off to go to Auschwitz. It was quite clear she was walking a line, and she follows Parsifal. They're going to go and have children, and it's actually a wonderful sort of reversal, and in many ways expresses what I think Wagner was trying to express in Parsifal. But now to Tristan and Isolde completely. The thing about Tristan and Isolde, perhaps more than any other opera, is it's the celebration of love. I think that's the really important thing. Essentially, it's a continuation of the theme that was established through Sieglinde in her plaintive outcry in Act 2 of Die Walküre. And she claimed that purity and honor do not lie within being faithful to marriage, but lie in being faithful to the self and to your own understanding of what your sexual being and your sexuality are. In Die Walküre, romantic fulfillment is basically denied. But ultimately, I don't think it is in Tristan and Isolde, although you may disagree with me on this. And this, again, is a topic that we can talk about for a long time. Isolde is actually unique in Wagner. She's no wilting violet. She's heroic from the very start. Whereas even Brunhilde actually sort of tries to carry quite a bit of pathos with her. In the first act of Tristan and Isolde, Isolde doesn't have any pathos at all. She is furious and she's angry. She's a princess and she knows it. She's furious at the marriage being forced on her. She's a woman perfectly taking care of herself in a rough world. There's only one thing that threatens her, and that is her feelings for Tristan. That's the only thing that worries her. She can be angry about all the other restrictions put on her, but she can cope with it. It doesn't destroy her, but quite clearly those feelings for Tristan do. And the whole of Act 1, the whole spine of Act 1, is essentially Isolde come to terms with her feelings for Tristan. Her increasingly agitated impulses impels her as if they become an irresistible tragic force. Her final surrender and acceptance of those feelings comes first when she drinks the love potion, and then in Act 2 with her famous hymn to Frau Hulda, which I think is one of the most ecstatic moments in Wagner, and I'm quite sure this hymn just about shot Clara Schumann out of the auditorium. one of the great moments of my life was I sat in the third row when Waltraud Meyer there was singing it in Berlin about 3 or 4 months after this performance was recorded, and it was one of the most sort of transformative moments in my life. It was incredible. But has any character in opera ever sung about love with such passion before Wagner? And has any character in opera since sung with such passion? I'm sure you can think of some, but it's a bit difficult because this is most incredible. It's the power, the conviction, the statement, what Sieglinde was sort of offering in rather sort of obscure terms in Die Walküre, is here offered completely. It's like a sort of a throwing of the bourgeois problems with sexuality. It's throwing them in their face. For Isolde, the fulfillment of her sexual desires is the only prerogative. Decorum and politics be damned. And I think this is the key sort of, I think she sort of sits entirely and completely and happily outside the socially sanctioned world. Now, next, Tristan, I think probably when people went to see it, they thought, oh, this is going to be another grand opera. If the seeming immorality of Tristan and Isolde put audiences off, so too did the way in which Wagner presented the opera. For a start, he called it a Handlung, which means an action. This means not a tragedy, not a comedy. No, tragedy or comedy tells you to a certain extent what's going to happen. Instead, it's an action. It's a very simple thing, very simple thing. Wagner's earlier works, by the way, were all referred to as romantic operas. Those were the pre-Ring operas. He all referred to them as romantic operas. And so probably, and this probably is actually is pretty certain, audience expectation when they went to see Tristan and Isolde for the first time was that they were going to see something like Tannhäuser or Lohengrin, which were medieval operas. Their stories were taken from the medieval sort of treasury of stories. And in particular, Lohengrin at this time was regarded, quite rightly, I think, as Wagner's signature achievement in the achievement of grand opera. In fact, in some ways, I think there are many good reasons for saying that Lohengrin is probably the finest of all the grand operas that have been written in the 19th century. There are good reasons for that. But not Tristan. There are many ways in which Tristan is not a grand opera. First, grand opera depended upon scenic spectacle, and this was exploited to the full to pull audiences in. But in Tristan and Isolde, scenic spectacle is reduced to a minimum. There's only one moment in Tristan and Isolde which could actually be counted as being grand opera, and this is when the boat arrives in Cornwall at the end of Act 1, and sort of an assortment of courtiers and soldiers and ambassadors and all sorts of other people sort of flock onto the stage. The chorus actually is virtually non-existent in Tristan and Isolde. In fact, you've probably seen productions where it doesn't even appear on stage. It sings off stage. In fact, probably it doesn't even sing off stage. It's a recording of them singing off stage so that people can save a little bit of money. But anyway, politics, armies, rituals, which the things were the heart of grand opera, are inimical to love. Love is a private, not a public matter. And grand opera, in fact, while it did have private events, there are love affairs, but at the same time, it deals primarily with big public events. Secondly, it has a limited cast. It has three principals, Tristan and Isolde and King Marker, two supporting roles, which is Brangena and Covenal, and then a few cameos, and then one other principal in the smallest role ever written for a principal, I think, in any opera, and that is Melot, who has probably about 3 to 4 lines. but actually, technically, he should be a principal because he's the villain. And you know, he's the one who in many ways Tristan should be fighting. And yet, any conflict between Tristan and Melot, it's just, although we know it's going on, it's just reduced to virtually nothing. We have no large choral or ensemble passages. Just think of the end of Act 1 of Lohengrin, when there's a duel, and it takes about 15 minutes to have the duel. You know, you begin with a prayer, and then you have the sort of other, and then you have the duel, and then you have the chorus of rejoicing. There's a duel at the end of Tristan. It takes 30 seconds, if that. And I have seen productions of Tristan and Isolde where I haven't even been aware that Melot has stabbed Tristan. Because so frequently, people hardly show it. They just, you know, it's something that takes place off stage, or not off stage, but you know, downstage left, where people don't look very often. I think this is very important that that this is dealing much more with people on their own rather than with big ensembles. And one thing, there's a focus on a single theme, and this is the great thing about Tristan and Isolde. It focuses upon sexuality. What is sexuality? Why do people love each other? What is the relative importance of private sexual love here and public considerations here? Well, the thing is that whereas grand opera would say, well, the public considerations are really important, in Tristan and Isolde, they are just progressively just shoved off stage. It becomes increasingly a private opera, just taking place among a few people. And Wagner, by the way, wanted it played in a small theatre. When he was rehearsing it in Munich, he wanted it to be performed in the Residenztheater because it's a small stage. But the king said, no, it's got to be on a big stage. And eventually Wagner gave way to that. But actually, he did see it as being a small opera. Many critics at the first performance actually did comment on the inappropriateness of the settings of the Munich production. Here we have Act 1. I think this is probably one of the worst stage sets I've ever seen. I've absolutely hated it, even when one can see to the Mackett version as well. It's massive. You know, look at Isolde, there she is, downstage right. You know, where is Brankina? I don't know. Is she here? Maybe she's over here. You don't really know. The thing is that the scenery just swamps the drama, which is very, very clear. It's too cluttered. It's fussy. It's detailed. The focus is on external, not internal conflicts. I couldn't actually find a picture for Act 2, but Act 3 was actually, I think, is in some ways was the finest of the sets, and it was the one that got most approval, because this is the castle in Normandy, and critics commented on its dilapidated state, and they praised it for its poetry. I think we, in particular, sort of are very taken by that sort of the massive sky there at the back, which is something that modern directors have really fastened upon. But in sky, that is where our imaginations can lie more happily. But anyway, this tends to reflect Tristan's state of mind a little bit more, so it does relate to the characters, but still, it's extremely picturesque. It's very nice. And if you in fact do get bored, you can spend a lot of time looking up at all the scenic details. Now, I said that in Tristan and Isolde, Wagner brings together two theatrical traditions that were normally considered to be irreconcilable. The first of those traditions is, well, I'll call them actually the neoclassical and the Shakespearean. First, we'll begin with the neoclassical. Most importantly, the plot of Tristan and Isolde was not the plot of grand opera. It doesn't have any intrigues, it doesn't have any politics, it doesn't have revolution, I beg your pardon. It doesn't really have that much suspense. In fact, there's virtually no plot. They're just simply, as Wagner said, ein Handlung, an action. And we just see that action performed, we see the beginning, the middle, and the end. But we do not have a complicated plot where we're told of events that happened before. Exactly the opposite. We do know events happened before, but on the whole, they exist more here than they do in something that can be absolutely sort of can be established. Back in 1949, a very fine scholar by the name of Francis Ferguson wrote a book called The Idea of a Theatre, and in this he has, I think, still what is one of the finest analyses of Tristan and Isolde as a theatre piece that we have, in which he says the real inspiration behind Tristan and Isolde is not necessarily the romantic poets. It is Racine, Corneille, the dramatists of the 17th century, and further back, ancient tragedy as well. And indeed, like neoclassical theatre and Greek tragedy, Tristan and Isolde sets the situation and resolves it. That's all it does. We have to remember that classical theatre was familiar to Wagner's audiences. Not only would many of them had a rigidly classical education, so they would know who Aeschylus and Sophocles and Euripides are, but also these plays were seen in properly adapted form, but they were seen in the theatres as well. They were performed more than they are today. Now, this is sort of the play itself does not really, I think about the libretto, the story itself, does not really seem to work with these rather elaborate sort of settings. It is actually based upon two episodes in Tristan und Isolde by Gottfried von Strasberg. I'm sorry, I don't know, I seem to have lost the tag that I put in here, I would have put up there. But anyway, if you want to know how to spell it, I'll tell you after. But anyway, two episodes from Tristan and Isolde. This Tristan und Isolde, I beg your pardon, is a great German narrative poem. It's actually a marvelous poem. It's well worth reading. I have read it right the way through with tremendous enjoyment. It's nothing like the opera at all. Nothing like the opera at all. All sorts of terrible things happen. They haven't been a affair for 10 years, for heaven's sakes. Marker and Isolde go shopping in London. Isolde actually plots to murder Duncan, not Duncan. There was a split when Marker is his name. Yeah. But anyway, Wagner in fact just chose two episodes from the poem for Act 1 and 2 that actually take up, about sort of a few hundred lines, but the poem is thousands of lines long. And by the way, it's a wonderful sort of picture of medieval Europe. The last act is not based upon Strasbourg at all. It's actually, the ending is taken from a French version of the story that was published quite a few years later. And anyway, a lot of it is probably Wagner's entire invention. And it's crucial to know that. It's crucial to know that. And I'll be getting into that just a little bit later. So it does have a real sort of neoclassical discipline about it. It's a very narrow opera in terms of its action. The style of delivery. Now, Wagner was a master of conversation opera. He knew how to catch the rhythm, the spontaneity, and the informality of conversation, and one can think of many operas in which he demonstrates this. Die Meistersinger afterwards is probably the finest of all conversational operas. You just get the idea that people just sort of live entirely with an orchestra going along with them who sing rather than speak. Now, in Tristan and Isolde, the opposite is the case. For much of the action, characters sing in speeches. They deliver narratives. They give tirades. They articulate extreme states of mind. They give speeches, even soliloquies. They don't really relate to each other as we do in dialogue. It tends to be much more flinging a speech and getting another one flung back at you, which was very characteristic of the neoclassical theatre. And by the way, when it is done by actors and by singers who really know what they're doing, it's a tremendously powerful mode of theatre. But as a neoclassical drama, none of the voice, nobody speaks, nobody interrupts with other people, that you have a constant sort of, each character is sort of somehow differentiated from the others. And in Tristan and Isolde, only at the end of Act 1 and during the love duet in Act 2 do two characters sing together, which is at one moment where we move beyond what was standard for the neoclassical form. Isolde, at the beginning of the opera, establishes the power of her personality in extended tirades against Tristan and all he stands for. By the way, just before I play this, I should have told you before, this is a performance that comes from Bayreuth with Walter Hauptmeier. Siegfried Jerusalem is Tristan, and Daniel Barenboim is conducting, and the production is by Heiner Müller. A very, very interesting production. I didn't like it the first time I saw it. Now I love it. It takes time to get used to it. But anyway, here we have Isolde as she establishes herself right the way from the beginning of the opera as a real explosive heroine. Control over the forces of nature, but her powers have been taken away from her. She excoriates the degenerate race of human beings, and she has an anger that is reminiscent of classical heroines. I can remember years and years ago when I first saw Tristan and Isolde, I got the impression I was seeing a Greek tragedy, and I thought she was either Medea or Phaedra. And she has that sort of quality of anger and fury that in fact is almost unique to drama from the classical and the neoclassical tradition. In contrast, but the interesting thing of course is Tristan and Isolde, the story is not taken from Greek tragedy. It is actually taken from the Germanic tradition, which is Wagner's own particular sort of mixing of the different elements. Tristan is initially a shadowy figure. He's constantly withdrawing. That's why I said Hippolytus, because he seems he wants to be rather like Euripides' Hippolytus. In the first act, he doesn't like women. He's constantly afraid of them until it gets to the moment where he takes the love potion. He doesn't want to face up to who he is. Actually, there's a fascinating psychological insight here from Wagner. Powerful women, like Isolde, often seem to be very attracted to less powerful men, and very frequently men with low sexual energy. Read Ibsen. which is actually, it's a big late 19th century theme. And actually Tristan and Isolde in Act 1, alongside this, you can hear Isolde's brimming over with it, whereas Tristan's constantly moving away from her. Both central characters, by the way, have confidants. Cornell is the confidant to Tristan and Brangæna of Isolde. Again, that is a complete convention from the neoclassical theatre. Indeed, in almost all plays from neoclassical France and also from ancient Greece, you'll find that the central characters have a companion to whom they will speak, and the companion's basic function is to be somebody spoken to and occasionally offer a comment. I think actually Wagner uses the confidants extremely well in Tristan and Isolde. In Rossinian drama, the confidants, I say, may be there just to be someone to talk to, but sometimes they may be instrumental in moving the plot forward. And in Wagner, both Cornell and Brangæna are more complete figures than most confidants in neoclassical opera or drama tend to be. In particular, Wagner gives them some of the best music in the opera, particularly Brangæna. If I was singing Isolde, I would be furious with Wagner for taking away from me the most beautiful passage in the whole opera, which you'll be hearing just in a little bit of time. But anyway, these confidants also serve as another function, particularly in Tristan and Isolde. They act as the chorus. The actual physical chorus is virtually non-existent. Just a few sailors and courtiers in the background. But Brangæna and Cornell are the voices of common sense. That's what the chorus was in a lot of Greek tragedy. Brangæna and Cornell are both voices of common sense and of knightly loyalty, in the same way that choruses tend to express the common opinion in classical tragedy. Just see the contribution that, in particular, Cornell makes here to the conflict between Isolde and Tristan very early, or so early on in Act 1, where in fact Isolde wants Tristan to come forward. If Tristan doesn't want to, he's really sort of nervous about this, and Cornell sort of steps in and says, "Let me look after what's going on here." Well, you can hear that music. It is very rhythmic. It's got a melody. You can actually sing it. You can whistle it as you go out. You can't do that with most of the music in Tristan and Isolde. In fact, sort of the Cornell is the most conventional of the characters in terms both of the music and in his relationship to Tristan. Brangena is quite a bit closer to Isolde, and at times she takes on the sound of Isolde's music as well. So she sort of shifts a little bit. But actually both of these confidants have a very considerable and important function in the action. The one other very significant character is King Mark, and he is noted primarily for his great monologue in Act 2, and I'll just touch on this a little bit later. The other characters tend to be ciphers. Now, a couple of more things about the neoclassical side before I go on to the Shakespearean, actually the romantic side. First, the place. According to the neoclassical tradition, you should have only one place represented on the stage. Well, actually, that was a misreading of Aristotle, who says, I have noticed the plays that are set in this way are successful. What we have in Tristan and Isolde is we do have very defined spaces. First, we have the ship from Ireland. Then we have the love tryst in the forest, and this is followed by the final act, which takes place in the castle in Normandy. The neoclassical unities are not literally followed here, but we do have a sense of limitations. Isolde is a prisoner at sea. The lovers are enclosed by the hunters. Tristan is dying in the ruin of his castle. We get this sense of them all being contained, though the minds of Tristan and Isolde, as we go on, try to sort of move beyond the world that they are in. The most recent production in Bayreuth, not most recent, there's just a new one, but the one before by Katharina Wagner, actually introduces surveillance as a major theme, that they're being looked at all the time by surveillance agents. I don't think it works. I don't think that's what Tristan and Isolde is about, actually. But it does show that there is a sort of there's a tight unity in the action. Time, again, most of the neoclassical, you said everything has to take place within 24 hours. Yes, and it does in a large number of plays. This unity is not followed literally, but it's surprising how the action can be very effectively compressed into 24 hours. In fact, if you take the idea that Tristan's coma lasts overnight, and he wakes up the next day, the whole action is held within 24 hours. And that idea of compression actually increases the power of it very strongly. That's very, 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 very much a neoclassical idea. And finally, the unity of theme. And here, neoclassicism reigns supreme. There is not a word or a tone in this opera that does not relate directly to the matter at hand. And that is the love of Tristan and Isolde, the interplay of desire and death, and the nature of sexuality. That is what this opera is about. And by the way, don't let anybody tell you that Wagner was a bore and wasted time. Every single one of his operas, in fact, is incredibly tightly written. And it's actually very, very difficult to actually cut them, because if you do, you cut out important material he's giving you. And Tristan and Isolde is one of the tightest. And this leads to a further distinct neoclassical feature of Tristan and Isolde, but at the same time it is one that's reversed. The characters are all determined by forces they cannot control. And this is one thing you would have in sort of classical and in neoclassical tragedy. These forces are normally felt as the demands of the state, demands of honor, demands of the past, demands of the family. But uncharacteristically for neoclassical drama, in Tristan and Isolde, the characters are under pressure, but the pressures come solely from within. That in fact, Tristan and Isolde, when they are conflicted, they're not conflicted by the outside world at all. The moment they admit their life, they disappear into a world that is different than that from outside. Interestingly enough, we can see this working in a fascinating way. The dominant theme of the prelude is the ever-recurring statement of the love theme. And in the prelude, it climaxes as a gigantic wave of sound. And actually, one hears it sort of, it's about three-quarters of the way through, suddenly from the lower strings, you will hear this statement of the love theme coming up stronger and stronger, and you get the sense that it's there, and it's going to fall upon all of us and destroy us. That was played by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra and Georg Solti. The reason I played that is Solti always finds towers and massive climaxes in Wagner, and he does it in this in Tristan and Isolde as well. Some conductors actually play it down, so the more lyrical aspects come through. But I think what Solti does is tremendously important, because in the prelude, that theme of love becomes a threat. It grows and grows and grows. You feel it here, and you know that's what Isolde is coming through. And then, as we move into Act 1, and we have the tremendous anger of Isolde, then suddenly Wagner takes us in an unexpected dimension. The love theme that had this overwhelming power in the prelude, and we feel is something that's about to destroy us, suddenly expresses surrender to the most alluring, intimate feeling. Listen to this. is a key moment in the opera, as that threatening theme suddenly becomes the love theme that we all love and know and live with. I see it's now about 2. I'm going on a little bit long. I've got, still got to talk about the romantic idea and at the end, the actual strange modernness. Is it okay if I carry on?
Go for it.
Okay, all
We're
right.
not leaving.
Okay, I'm off.
Oh, no, not you.
Could I have a glass of water?
Oh, absolutely.
Thanks. Do you want a break or?
No.
Okay, all right. I just don't want to bore people. I don't come on forever, but there's a lot to say about this opera. Okay, there are actually 2 issues that really feature are remarkable in the great Act 2 that follows, and that in many ways is actually the romantic heart of Tristan and Isolde. This is the exploration of the dynamics of romantic love. And Wagner's genius at making love possess the entire stage and auditorium to achieve the ideal of romantic theatre, in which he duplicates and recreates the emotions of the protagonists, and he makes the audience feel them, so that the audience feel that they too are part. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good, I can talk now. Okay, right. The audience feels that they are part, literally almost, part of the world of Tristan and Isolde. In other words, a seamless unity is created on the stage, which I think actually is the ultimate in the so-called Gesamtkunstwerk. So let me just sort of go through this, and I hope to be fairly precise as to how this is done. Act 2 begins with a brief introduction, as if Wagner's actually sort of saying, I have a lesson to teach you. A brief introduction to the romantic way of feeling and seeing from a subjective perspective. In other words, when you are a romantic and you, in fact, are filled with sort of, with the energies of romantic love, the world around you, you interpret it as being essentially expressive of the love that you feel. It goes on. But the important thing is, Isolde hears what she wishes to hear. She interprets everything in the world, in the external world, as a metaphor for her inner world and her inner happiness. The external world is actually either being abandoned or being adapted so it becomes something that is interpreted by her own inner feeling. And this arises from the power of Frau Holder, in other words, the Venus, the goddess of love in German mythology. It is when you have this love that everything is sort of reinterpreted, and what might be dangerous to one person is in fact nothing to another person. And so Isolde turns envy into love, death into love and life. It's balanced, and this is balanced by Brancaena's outpouring of fear that Isolde is going to destroy herself, as she pays no heed to the objective world. And interestingly, this revolves around Brancaena's fear of Merot. She knows what intrigue is. She knows the world out there. Isolde refuses to listen and will hear nothing negative and will interpret anything that actually is evil and objectively threatening to her. She interprets it in a completely different and more positive way. And the remainder of Act 2, including King Mark's monologue, is a progressive surrender to the romantic metaphor of love and to this way of understanding the world when you see it through the mind of the lover. The great central part of the whole music drama, of course, is the love duet, in which Wagner combines two modes of loving, conventionally regarded as discrete or even self-cancelling. Erotic love on the one hand, and spiritual love on the other. And how many of us, even in our own education, have been told that erotic and spiritual love are incompatible? They do not come together. That's a load of nonsense. And Wagner knows it, and that, to a considerable degree, is what he's writing about in Tristan and Isolde. Love of the body and love that connects one to a world that lies beyond physical life. This love is one and the same thing. Now, the love duet itself, the structure of it. Actually, when I go into preparing these notes, I suddenly realised that actually it's structured like a 5-act play. And actually, if one looks at it in 5 acts, I don't think that Wagner consciously did this, but you look at the 5 acts, you can actually sort of get a clear idea of how it's developing. The first part of the love duet is the outburst of joy. They see each other, and there's just this sort of this wonderful, we've been apart for at least 20 minutes, or we've been apart for 20 years. It could be either, as Shakespeare said, absence is determined, the length of absence is determined by the feeling. But anyway, there are ecstatic outbursts of pure joy as the lovers meet. This is wild and whirling music. And then this is followed in part 2 as a long exchange between day and night and love and death. In other words, these sort of strange dualities that seem to sort of be opposite to each other, but aren't. In fact, they seem to be the same thing, which is very, very much an essence of what the romantic is. But anyway, these are the prime forces that are drawing the lovers together. And then there's the great central part of the duet from O Sinke nieder to Sept bin ich der Welt and Brancaena's call. And in here, and this is, I think, the crucial part of the whole opera. Tristan and Isolde are embodiments of the world, not only of themselves, but as something much larger than them. Even though we have a tiny space, even though we have a small area, they feel themselves as it is. They are, in fact, sort of become, so they have a worldwide sort of resonance. Selbst bin ich der Welt, I myself am the world. This is an extraordinary image of the fullness and the transformative power of romantic love. And this is combined then with Brancaena's call, of which more in a moment. And after the central section of the love duet slows in the passage where Tristan and Isolde, after Brancaena's call, we go back to sort of a somewhat sort of slightly less evocative element, which is when they talk about und and identity. They talk about who they are. I am you, you are me. In other words, the issue of identity in romantic love. And this ends with an ecstatic union, which quite clearly is supposed to indicate sort of a sexual union as well. And this is cruelly interrupted by the appearance of Marker and his court. Now, the music of the whole love duet is remarkable for its accuracy, for its graphic suggestion of lovemaking. The opening passage is full of breathless excitement of the lovers, the thrill of reunification. The closing passage is the most unabashedly erotic music that Wagner ever wrote. Actually, maybe I think any composer ever wrote. It quite clearly indicates two people deeply in love with each other and making that love. It captures the waves of love, the growing physical intensity that comes with the appearance of immense passion. And at the end, it delivers us the cruelest coitus interruptus in any work of art. No wonder Clara Schumann didn't like it. The orchestra is crucial in developing the supernal piece that settles over the stage in the central portion of the duet. It's interesting, the lovers do not sing together in the first two parts of the love duet. They sing separately. Oh, literally one after the other. They're exchanging sort of thoughts, but they don't actually sing in union. But when we get to O Cinque Anida, that's where they begin to sing together. And the orchestra moves from psychological dynamics to communicating the actual experience of love during what they refer to as the sacred night. The orchestra brings together the union of the physical and the spiritual, and as they sink into each other in perfect peace, the vocal line is taken away from Tristan and Isolde and is given to Brangäna. And I think this is the most brilliant part of the opera. Brangäna sings her warning of the world about, she says, be careful, you're going to be destroyed. And she sings about this, but in the music of utter serenity. It's the most beautiful music. There's so many beautiful music patches in, but it's one of the most beautiful music patches of the opera. She's absorbed into the night. And this is a brilliant move by Wagner, because the whole stage, the whole world has become Tristan and Isolde. I actually once saw Tristan and Isolde from a box in an Italian opera house. And when this passage worked, I suddenly stopped looking at the stage and I looked at the auditorium, and it was a fabulous moment because everybody seemed to be part of what Tristan and Isolde was singing about. This in many ways, I think, is why this is the high point of romantic theatre, even though romantic and neoclassical were actually seen as sort of opposite to each other. I think that this is that key moment. Let us hear it. This is actually a long episode. It's about 7 minutes, but it takes in O Cinque Anida to Brangäna's call. I hope we can get a very clear idea of what I'm talking about here. I think it'd be worthwhile living just to be able to sing that music. It's so glorious. But anyway, it's unique, the Love Duet, and it's delivered with all the stars. I think it's quite right to do it as Heinemura does it here, with them absolutely standing there. If they started running around like they do in a lot of Verdi, you know, when they have Love Duets, it just completely sort of destroys the music. What it is the music comes out and makes you, each one of you, a member of this incredible experience that they're going through. This is actually a combining, I think, of the Romantic and Neo-classical traditions that certainly in its time was unique. And Wagner had an immense intelligence in realizing that at this point the music alone should do its job. But then something crucial happens. Or maybe actually say something crucial doesn't happen. What I'm saying is the romantic aura is very briefly shattered by the onslaught of Melot and the court, but it's not dispelled. Surprisingly, the whole aura that has been established in the Love Duet by Brangäna and by Tristan and Isolde is sustained by King Marker rather than destroyed by it. Marker stands in the lovers' minds and in the audience's minds and in probably most people's minds. He's a king, he's a husband, he's a father. He is the sort of the embodiment of everything that is responsible and that actually really denies the joy and freedom that individuals can achieve. He is the unwanted husband, and for Tristan in particular, he's the all-enfolding father figure who has guided both his private life and his public career, and in the theatre he should be doing his job. But in Tristan and Isolde, he doesn't. Marker's response, which I find tremendously beautiful, unfortunately I can't really spend, I've spent a lot of time analysing it. It's not an outburst of anger and resentment, rather it's an expression of deep mourning. He too has discovered the existential nature of the world, that this is something that is there in the world and there's nothing he can do about it. It's just there. And his monologue as a result strikes one more as a continuation of the dialectic on love, rather than something that's trying to oppose and dispel it. This was, I think, another radical reversal of audience expectations, and why Wagner, by the way, just dispenses with Tristan with a little flick of the knife or whatever it is that injures him, rather than having a great sort of make a great fuss of it and break up the incredible sort of atmosphere that has been set up through this act. Now to the last act. Wagner famously said of Act 3 in Tristan, and we should not laugh at him here because he was right, in a letter to Matilda Wesendonck, this Tristan is becoming something terrible. This last act, I fear the opera will be forbidden unless the whole is turned into a parody by bad production. Nothing but indifferent performances will save me. Completely good performances will drive people crazy. Now this is Wagner in his sort of rather sort of expansive, florid mode, his sort of, you know, his self-dramatization. But actually, it's understandable. Tristan has never been heroic. In fact, Tristan is possibly one of the first anti-heroes in opera. He's vulnerable, he's physically conflicted. There's also a raw, abrasive quality to him that really has not been resolved. And here, more than anywhere else in Wagner, in Act 3, we have a sustained exploration of Tristan's mind and of his character. The seamless sublimity of the Love Duet has been completely destroyed. Tristan has been injured, he's lying, he's been in a coma. Where he's been, we don't know. He's been to somewhere where the sun never rises. He He's been to various parts of the world. He's the only thing that he feels all the time is Isolde is not with me. Isolde is not with me. Isolde is what I need. He has lost Isolde. So essentially, this is the experience when you have lost that transcendent experience that had gone on in Act 2. The seamless sublimity of the love duet is recalled in that long, sort of massive sort of monologue that he has. It does go on for about 40 minutes. Clara Schumann was right about that, but it is actually, it's a fascinating 40 minutes. The seamless sublimity of the love duet is recalled, but only in fragments. We prize Wagner for the beauty of his sound, but during Tristan's monologue, beauty is no longer the prime consideration. The most successful performances of this act can be deeply disturbing. I did go through it once with, interesting enough, Secret Jerusalem, when he came and sung it in Los Angeles. And he was not very, he had a bit of trouble in the first and second acts because he was actually already beginning to sort of, get a little bit beyond his prime in this role. He was unbelievable in Act 3. And you really got the sense that you're going through this experience of abandonment, of desolation, of the crumbling, the collapse of the whole psyche, of your whole being, was really directly communicated. It took me quite a long time to get over it, like 2 or 3 days. It's not something that you just don't get off. And actually, I keep on feeling it's rather like, I don't know how many of you know Strindberg's plays, but you really get this idea. It was like going through a Strindbergian drama that deals with the way in which we lose the cohesion of our minds as we go mad. While romantic love is actually presented as an ideal to be achieved, in Act 3 we see the damage it can do. And in this act, Wagner introduces opera to modern psychological drama. And this has nothing to do with neoclassicism. It has nothing to deal with romanticism. It's the next phase on. I don't think Wagner actually knew that he was doing this. What it is, we're moving from the past into the present, and once you look at it, into the future as well. It's difficult to rationalize all aspects of this act. We can read Tristan's immense monologue as an appalling reaction to he's suddenly denied Isolde. Transformation has not occurred, and this has led to a mental crisis in Tristan. He has not surrendered himself easily to romantic experience. And I should say this, Wagner is not sentimental about romantic experience. In the collapse of Tristan, we can see how this in fact can be extraordinarily dangerous for the stability of the human being, as well as potentially fulfilling him or her. But anyway, in recounting the dream or the coma that he's being in, he comes, most importantly, to understand the circumstances of his birth and how they have made him what he is. They've made him Tristan, the sad one, when that is something that is always there. The monologue that's in about 3 or is in long chunks, begins calmly, as if it's representing the peace of the nothingness that lies beyond death. But agitation grows as Tristan realizes that death is not necessarily unconsciousness, but it's a torment if you're deprived of Isolde. The romantic beauty of his voice gradually erodes, and it develops into existential rebellion. Woven into the music is the most depressing melody ever written. And this is the alta weiser, this heavy melody that seems to imprison one in ground and in soil. You ever seen that film Dune? Those horrible sort of worm-like things that sort of come out of the sand. Well, I feel, it's like that. It's like one of those horrible things that's constantly sort of going after you, and it's dead and imprisoning. This whole passage, by the way, is, I would say, the first example of stream of consciousness in opera. And stream of consciousness, as I'm sure several of you are aware, if you've had done any reading, particularly in the late 19th and early 20th century literature, both in the United States and in Europe, stream of consciousness was one of the flag bearers of the modernist movement. That in fact, that is the way in which we come to understand people's minds. And if we read this as a stream of consciousness, rather than a piece of exposition telling us, oh, well, this happened and this happened and this happened, if we read it as a stream of consciousness, then we can understand it. And in fact, I think also be moved by it. It's difficult to make rational sense of it, but the music makes abundantly clear what is happening in Tristan's mind. This is one of the climactic points where Tristan thinks back and he realizes that his relationship with Isolde was strongly influenced by his mother and his father. If we have any Freudians here, quite clearly we can see those sort of questions being asked. But we aren't given answers. We're just opened up to the way in which we have been born and which we have gone through this life. Here we have before the issue of the setting, here we move into Samuel Beckett. It quite clearly relates to Waiting for Godot and Endgame. And actually, when I first saw it, and I was a little bit dubious about the first two acts, I got it in this third act. It really uses very, very modern images to communicate this terrible sort of psychological problem that Tristan's been going through. It's modernist because one of the great purposes of modernist art was to communicate directly and without any concern for beauty, communicate directly to people the pain of living. Romanticism wanted to be direct, but didn't want to actually necessarily communicate the pain. So we do see this sort of this almost historical movement from the first act, a sort of a neoclassical setting, to the romanticism of the second act, to the modernism of the third. But this uncommon direction also serves a dramatic function. It's as if at the end, actually, and I'm going to play you one more extract, Tristan has purged himself of the poison as he curses himself and falls to the ground. He recognizes that the poison comes from himself, as it came from his mother, from his father, from Isolde. He realizes that the impulses that are tearing him to pieces are indeed sort of ones that are a common humanity. For me, I think this is another great moment in the opera. It's what the Greeks called anagnoresis, the moment of self-recognition, when you say, oh, I'm not the most exceptional person I thought. Everybody experiences what I'm going through. Now I understand. And Wagner recognized this wonderfully because Tristan faints, then he comes to himself in a very different mood. He has the vision of Isolde sailing toward him on a ship, and perhaps only now he can contemplate her as an ideal and serene figure. This is the sort of the moment of anagnoresis, where now he recognizes who he is, and I think he comes to terms with it.
Es naht noch heut, es kann nicht
It is always those words, Ach Isolde, wie schön bist du, which stay in my ear for the next several weeks. But the moment that he achieves this vision where he sees her as he really wants her to be, tune changes to a cheerful one, the outer visor disappears, and the gloomy atmosphere of Act 3 is dispelled. It's filled with action, with energy. Isolde comes, and then, in a repetition of the moment in Act 1 where they first fell in love, Tristan dies. So, what do we make of all this?
Yeah.
Well, three things. First, a technical one. After Tristan's death, I think everything, with the exception of Isolde's Liebestod, should be cut. The only place that should be cut. It just clears up superfluous details that are absolutely nothing to us, because we've gone so far into the character's mind, and these details seem superfluous. King Mark comes on and says, "Oh, somebody explained to me what happened. I came to tell you you could get married," and and all this stuff. And then there's sword fighting. Quite frankly, I would just cut that, and I would go for Liebestod. It has been done that way, but I have been told actually even that doesn't work, and I can understand why it doesn't work, because one might want a bit more of a transition from that wonderful solo that we had with Tristan. More importantly, although the time scheme of Tristan and Isolde might be tight, as I say, it can quite credibly be done within within a 24-hour time scale, and without in any way violating the action at all. I always feel, after Tristan and Isolde, that we have covered years. We have come from the ancient theatre through to our own very disturbed time, and we have seen all five characters, Tristan, Isolde, King Mark, and actually possibly that is a reason why maybe Mark should come back at the end, because he too has been moved by this, by Cornell and Brangena. We have seen them move, we have seen them come together. But most importantly, I feel the action itself, the Handlung, as Wagner called it, has actually covered epochs. Whereas in fact it might be just 24 hours and it's only about 4 or 5 people. The music is the product of the Romantic period. It has the lushness, the melodies, and the extraordinary personal appeal, but in dramatic modes that have been taken from different periods, in particular ancient Greece and the French neoclassical period. So these styles have been taken from previous ages of spoken and sung drama. The romantic heart of the opera is enhanced by the unfamiliar way, borrowed from neoclassicism, in which it is unfolded to us. Never in vigorous staging or with the melodramatic gesture of the 19th century theatre, but in stillness and in silence, where we find the music penetrates our minds and fills the entire space in which we and the characters and the singers and the performers are all present. And at the end, there is a scene unequal in theatre, where the music is used in a virtually merciless way to expose the tormented mind of Tristan, and then comes to a marvellous, harmonious conclusion, which, by the way, does not mean this is not a tragedy, because tragedy can end in visions of unity as well. But maybe this is the reason why 19th century audience were confused. I think many of us in this room, I know I might have been very confused when I first saw it on the stage, if I first saw it on the stage in Munich. But I think now we can see that this covers not only a wide range of history, but it also ushers in the first of the modern operas. And then comes the beatific ending. And I would suggest that I stop now to answer any questions that you might have. And then if you want to stay, it's not no surprise, what I have got up here is the Liebestod, and maybe you might look at that. So, are there any questions?
What was that performance that you played?
It's Bayreuth.
Yeah, I thought it was Bayreuth.
Yeah, it's Bayreuth. It's the, I think the first time the production was
And
done.
who was singing Tristan?
Siegfried Jerusalem.
I thought it was.
Yeah, Siegfried Jerusalem,
Yeah.
yeah. Yes. His voice is very, very strong, man. Very strong, yeah, yeah.
Okay, thanks. So you mentioned Shakespeare very briefly,
Yes.
and that made me think of Romeo and Juliet and Antony and Cleopatra. And I was thinking, okay, both of those plays sort of anticipate many of the elements that you have mentioned here, like the identification of day with violence and death, and night with like isolated, private, romantic love. And also just in terms of the structure of the plot, where it's the two lovers against this like wider social political world, and they're oppressed and they can't find a place in it. Or in the case of Antony and Cleopatra, even this sense of, you know, the whole world is worth nothing, I abandon, you know, this Roman imperial project for sort of private romantic love. But so I was thinking, you know, throughout the first two acts, as you were going through them, like, how is this like different? But then it seems like when the third act comes, it seems like that is very different. And, or maybe even by the end of the second act. So I was wondering what you think about this, which is why does Tristan let himself be killed at the end of the second act?
He lets himself be killed 4 times. First, he drinks the love potion thinking he's going to die. Secondly, actually, very frequently it is staged that he just stands like this and lets Maylop run him through. I'm trying to think of the third. I knew I was going to be asked this question. I'm all worked out. Oh yeah, the third time is, well, no, he tears off his bandages so that his wounds bleed. But there is one other time. But he is, I think something is, he is a very fatalistic individual, that in fact sort of Isolde is the one who gives him energy to keep him alive, and when she goes, he goes too. She doesn't. I think there are certain sort of issues of human psychology here that we have to look at and see what Wagner is writing about, because he clearly sees greater emotional stability in women than in men, which is not something that the 19th century would have agreed with. As far as Romeo and Juliet are concerned, in many ways it's very different, because for one thing, Romeo and Juliet are young. Tristan and Isolde is a middle-aged opera. There's no doubt about it. These, even though Isolde, it's supposed to be 18 or something, she's not 18. You know, 18-year-old women do not sing music like that. They wouldn't even have any sort of, she has credibility on stage because she is a mature woman who knows what the world is about. And the issue, whereas in Romeo and Juliet, we are kept aware of the violence of the world the whole time. We see it right the way through to the last act. In Tristan and Isolde, it's all shoved away. We know it's there, but ultimately we're not particularly interested. That's why I say, oh, look, I just wish King Martin would come on and they say, well, you know, we now find out what happened and we'll forgive you and everything. That doesn't matter, because we got so closely into the whole phenomenon of people coming together. So I find that, and Antony and Cleopatra, it's an interesting work, one of the most difficult of his plays, particularly as it's very funny, it's very tragic. But anyway, I think what we can say is that it's really a sort of an opera to a considerable extent about a midlife crisis. Rather, and that's what I think Wagner's interested in. If he'd written it when he wrote Lohengrin, he might have written something very different. Yeah.
Emma has a question here.
Yes.
Let's see.
So, thank you for this wonderful, thought-provoking presentation. To continue on your question, I think that Tristan was dead when he first appeared on stage. He actually, in the course of this action, he died 3 times. The first time he died when Isolde found him on this little skiff. He was practically dead.
Yes.
And she revived him with her potions and fell in love with him. And this is the first act. The second act clearly tells us that Tristan doesn't consider himself of this world. He says, we're people of the night, we belong to the night. Night is death. He is not alive he's alive for certain intents and purposes, but generally his whole mental sphere, his position in this world is a position of a man who doesn't want to live. He belongs to death.
And he's a man in control too, and
Yeah.
in power.
And the third time, he dies, of course, of his wounds, because Isolde wasn't there on time to give him the potion. So he died 3 times. Twice he was revitalized by her presence and by her potions. But the fact that it's not a real figure, Tristan, it's a metaphysical manifestation. They don't act like normal people, metaphysical people, you know? And if you read the words of the second act, it becomes very clear that this person is already not here. When he wakes up in the third act, he says, I already was there. I was there. He overstepped the Rubicon. He crossed it to the other side. And then he says, something pulled me back. Something. And this something was a thought, not a physical action, the thought of Isolde. An image of Isolde came to his mind when he was already there. He was in this state between love, life, and death. It's very hard to understand. And until I read the libretto while listening to music, I read the words and marked them. I was confused. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yes, Ingrid.
What was the significance of that strange necklace they were
Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah.
actually, they are slaves. They are slaves. I think this is what it is. They're slaves to convention, to responsibility, to military issues, to questions of honor. And when I first saw them, I thought, what the hell are they? But then they take them off, and they take them off right at the point where that love theme comes in. And suddenly there they are. And you really, it's brilliant. It's very, very, very simple. They come together, and we get a sense that their bodies are free. So I think that's what it's for. Yes.
And it seems like barriers to me.
Yes.
Barriers
Yes.
to not connect
Yeah.
anybody to anything.
Yeah. I mean, it's rather, if you'd imagine the scenery that I showed you from Act 1 of the first production, imagine all that's on them, and then they take it off. Well, they just took off this little thing, but it has that power, actually, so they are taking off heavy responsibility. Yes.
I had one comment. One of my favorite things, it's just a comment, and one of my favorite directors, Nicholas Lanehoff, said, he made a comment, Tristan and Isolde takes place on the landscape of the human soul. Now that's pretty
There we go.
damn powerful.
I'll deal with that.
Yeah.
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 Yes.
You just briefly touched on it, but why does Isolde not follow Tristan? She says she's gonna follow after she realized.
She doesn't, well, we don't know. We don't know.
I always wondered.
Yeah, but you know what, I don't know. I just don't find that a question like she does follow to a certain
Well,
extent.
yeah, but-
And I mean, if you want to sort of make it accountable in terms of sort of a plot, she, you know, was probably kept by Marco, and by the court, who said, well, you know, you've committed a crime and you've got to stay, and then they find out everything. But she does, of course, come at the end.
Yeah.
She does, of course,
But
come
you know,
at the end.
given how strong their
Yeah,
connection was,
Yeah.
I always wonder why.
yeah, yeah. So any
We done?
other?
Okay, well, thank you, Simon Williams.
Well, would you like to see the scope?
Yes.
Yes, you up for that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, right, let's have the leaders.
You know what? Here? Oh, yeah.
Here we go.
I'll see you go. Survive. I learned about resolution.